Hello, this is Mrs. Taylor, and I'm going to show you how to solve an equation by factoring. So the way we learned in class was to first factor your trinomial here on the left by using what we call the X puzzle. And so the X puzzle helps you organize the information that you need to factor the trinomial. And so what you do is you take your C value, your constant, place it in the top of the X, your B value in the bottom of the X. And remember, if there's no number in front of the variable, we understand it to be 1. And then what you would do to solve the X puzzle is you factor the top number so that you have two numbers that multiply to equal that number but add to equal the bottom. So two numbers that multiply to equal -2 but add to equal 1. And so the factors of -2 that would add to +1, oops, I did that backwards, is +2 and -1. So once I have that, I create my two sets of parentheses for my two binomials that would multiply out to equal b squared plus b minus 2. And I place a variable in each one, and then I just fill in the two numbers I found to solve my X puzzle. So what I have now is I have the undistributed form of b squared plus b minus 2. If I multiplied these two binomials out, my result after simplifying would be my original trinomial. Okay, so from there, what I do is I use the idea that if I multiply anything by 0, I get 0. So if the first set of parentheses, if whatever I plug into that first set of parentheses, once I evaluate equals 0, the whole thing equals 0, no matter what's in the second set of parentheses. So how that translates to solving is I would take each binomial, each set of parentheses, and set those expressions equal to 0 separately. So I have two cases. And so here I would add 1 to both sides. I'd get b equals 1. And then here I would subtract 2 from both sides, get b equals -2. So that would be my two solutions to this equation. And if I needed to check my answer, and you always should check your answer, I can use my calculator to do that. I just take one of the solutions and I plug it in for the variable, and I use parentheses anytime I plug in a number. So if I'm checking to see if 1 is a solution, I would type in parentheses 1 squared and then plus 1 minus 2. And I did get 0, so I know b equals 1 is a solution. And then if I'm testing my second solution, which was b equals -2, I would do parentheses -2 parentheses squared plus parentheses -2 and then minus 2. And I got 0, so my two solutions check out, so I know they're right. Now, one thing that you always have to look for is a GCF, a greatest common factor. So for this equation, if I look before I even start an X puzzle, I notice that each of the numbers, 7, 35, and 42, can all be divided by the same number, the number 7. That's the greatest common factor. That's the biggest number that will divide into each of those. So I want to factor that out first before doing the X puzzle. So if I divide each of these by 7, I can factor a 7 out, and that would leave me with v squared. 35 divided by 7 would be 5, and then 42 divided by 7 would be 6. And so now I create the X puzzle for just what's in the parentheses. So my C value goes in the top, my B value goes in the bottom, and now I need two numbers that multiply to equal -6 but add to equal 5. And so the factors of 6 are 6 and 1, but also 3 and 2. And depending on the signs, if one's positive, one's negative, I can add those together to get 5. But I need to pick the exact ones that give me a positive 5, but when I multiply a -6. And so that would be 6 and -1. Okay, so when I write my factored form, I have my two sets of parentheses, my variables, and then plus 6 and minus 1. Now, for solving, what we do is we take each factor and set it equal to 0. Well, in this case, I have a 7 out front. And if I wrote 7 equals 0, that doesn't make sense because 7 doesn't equal 0. So all that means is this 7 isn't going to affect your solution because if you multiply 7 by 0 as a result from plugging in a number in either of these parentheses, it's going to equal 0 no matter what, the whole thing. So, in other words, I can just kind of ignore the 7. So I'd have v plus 6 equals 0, v minus 1 equals 0, and then to finish solving, I would subtract 6. So v equals negative 6, add 1, so v equals 1. And again, you need to check those in your calculator to make sure they are correct. And so that's how you would solve by factoring using the X puzzle. And in these cases, these are when a equals 1. In other words, there's no number directly in front of your squared term, either at first or after you factor out a GCF.